Hi, this is Ren.
This is KC.
And this is All Walks of Film. We have guests today, and we are going to be talking about Black Panther. So our guests are Avery.
What's up?
Haley.
Hey.
Loren.
Hello.
And Cindy.
Hi.
So let's get into this. What did everybody think of the film?
Loved it.
It was great. I don't know how to. Are we going in an order, or I don't know.
We can, or we can just kind of
jump in.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. I thought that it was very brilliant in the sense of understanding intersectionality within the Black community. Like, for me personally, like, I am a Senegalese American child born of immigrant parents who was brought smack dab into a Black community when I was a kid, and learning that I was different from not only Black African Americans, but Africans, and kind of just seeing that there is a divide there and implementing that in a Western blockbuster. I just thought that just blew my mind, and I absolutely love that concept.
I'm just really excited to see a big budget blockbuster movie that has an all-black cast. Well,
yeah, me
not
too.
An all-black cast, but
mostly, and Martin Freeman.
Mostly, yeah.
Like,
it's been a while.
It has been a long time, yeah.
Very long time.
Yeah.
And pretty much every film that has had that has been a comedy, from my understanding.
Exactly.
Yep.
Let's see. Well, it was Red Tail a few years ago.
What did?
Red Tails a few years ago, but no one saw that.
No.
Yeah, it wasn't. But yeah, Red Tails also wasn't like a big budget, blockbuster. Like, we've had ones that we were talking about that earlier. We've had ones that were predominantly Black cast, but they weren't like big budget, like Selma, Hidden Figures and whatnot. But they weren't like big budget,
The fact that I just had to Google what Red Tails was, I think, speaks for itself.
Red Tails was a $60 million movie.
It has a 2-star rating on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't think we should talk about that.
Yeah.
I wasn't defending it as good.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't saying
60
you
million.
all need to check out Red Tails. I was saying it exists. It has a blockbuster budget and an all-black cast and director. I didn't say it was good.
Yeah, no, okay, I get you.
And one of the rare films that is not about slavery or civil rights.
Exactly. Yeah. Right?
Oh, yeah. It's about civil rights. It's about the integration of. Oh wait, we're back to Black Panther. Never mind. So, all right, I'll look up. You keep talking. I'll look up more back catalog George Lucas things. I'm gonna learn about Radioland Murders now.
I will say, coming from the, just straight up African American, raised in the hood of Chicago standpoint, I have to agree. Like, it was an amazing movie, especially in the fact that they tied in, the relationship between African and African Americans, and
exactly.
That divide that is there. That you go up to somebody and you're like, "Oh, you're African American." They're like, "No, I'm African," or "Oh, you're African." "No, I'm African American." That whole divide that's there that most people don't touch on. They don't even think about,
or even notice.
Or even notice. They're just like
you probably wouldn't know if you weren't in the Black community. Like, for some people, it's just like, wait, what? I thought everyone was just kind of like the same, like, here.
Yeah, I thought I could just call everybody African American.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, no, you definitely cannot.
Everyone celebrates Kwanzaa, right? Like, that's just a Pan-African. That's what we are, I think.
I think one of the funniest things to hear people try to figure out what to say is when you have Black people from the UK and they're like, African American. I mean,
yeah, that's true. It's really funny.
I still don't know what to say. I just say person of color. Black person. Like it's so like the terminology I get really tripped up on. And I feel like that's probably something that's very annoying and frustrating for the Black community. Like, because we don't separate we don't separate white people. Like, oh, they
Italian
are
American, and like we have a German American and a Polish American. Like, you never have to hyphenate like white people.
Right, we're just white. So like we don't have this problem with our culture because like for a lot of us, like it's just kind of like the American culture. So like in first, like I was so happy for this movie because it was an opportunity for like my Black friends to celebrate their like African culture that they have been like we've basically like completely abolished. You know, centuries and centuries here in the US. And like, you know how white people during Black History Month, we always want to say, well, what happened to White History Month? Why can't we have that? And it's like, yo, every day is White History Month. Like,
yeah, of course.
Like, let this be a celebration.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the fact that the film, you were going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, I definitely agree with that. And I think not only was it a chance for African Americans to kind of celebrate their culture, but also, you know, like African immigrants who, like, for example, Loren and I saw so many African families, you know, wearing their traditional clothing. Like, I wish I was wearing my own Senegalese clothes that I usually had to like hide because I had to assimilate, you know, into the American culture. But seeing like Africans like come in and be like, wow, we're actually being portrayed in a Western film as a sophisticated culture and as a culture that is underestimated, but is actually greater than they seem. And that is huge. I think that was also, it appealed to both sides and it also showed both sides. And I think it proposed a theoretical way of merging. And I thought that was really brilliant.
Oh, I got that cough too.
I will say I one of the biggest things that I really loved about the movie, and I've always respected about African cultures, is especially, you know, non-urbanized, you know, the villages and everything. African cultures have a tendency to come into a very good equilibrium with their environment that, you know, we in Western civilization do not. You know, we just cut everything down and, you know, go to an area until the resources are gone. They portrayed that very well with Wakanda. You know, the first shots of Wakanda, it's like, yeah, there's these big, immense buildings, but it's basically built into the environment. It's not, you know, taking over completely. It's built with a natural, like, you know, equilibrium with everything that is around them. And that's something that's always prevalent in African cultures that a lot of people don't think about, and it's something we could learn, you know, being Western civilizations, just, you know, coming into an equilibrium and living healthy and comfortable lives without completely decimating an area, you know.
Well, yeah, and oftentimes that gets dubbed as primitive.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think so. My favorite idealism when it comes to like thinking about like the future is like this beautiful eco landscape, where everything that we do is like blended, like, and it was like very represented in Wakanda, like in the movie. Like that's my favorite like ideal for the big, like the future of, you know, humanity is like we have this very blended with our ecosystem. And I know we're in the age of post-apocalyptic like desert land, and you know we completely depleted our resources, and it's about how we just survive on that. And I would want to be optimistic that we learn from our mistakes and we learn how to live with the earth. So it was really cool to see that represented in a like Marvel film, like, and especially like the first one that has like a, you know, majority Black cast, and it's very Afrofuturistic. I love that term now, like, and everything like they incorporated in this film, like it was just absolutely beautiful.
So let's get into that. Afrofuturism. It's a concept that came up in an essay called Black to the Future. I actually haven't read the essay yet. I don't know if anybody has.
A while back, but it's been a minute. But I read most of it. It's
So,
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna ask if you could give a summary of it.
I have a quote from it if you would like that.
That would
Is
be
the
wonderful.
philosophy of Afrofuturism. Can a community whose past has been deliberately rubbed out and whose energies have subsequently been consumed by the search for legible traces of its history imagine possible futures? Furthermore, isn't the unreal estate of the future already owned by the technocrats, futurologists, streamliners, and set designers, white to a man, who have engineered our collective fantasies?
I don't think you could really summarize the essay more than that section right there. That is the whole central idea is, can this group of people who, as it says, entire basically history and everything has been snuffed out, or cut down to just this month, or this small little section in the history books that it's 2 pages for schools. Can we as a culture rise to where all these other cultures are and get ahead in the future when so much of who we are and whatnot is missing? And for a good portion of us, unless you do the research and really get down into it, you're not going to really know where you came from. I would say at this point it's a theory and a hypothesis within the Black community, because there are those of us who are like, we're like, we can do this, and have this drive for it. But those are also the ones who have gone out and done the research and see the potential that not even just all Black people, but people of color have to excel. And then there's those who are unfortunately ignorant, and it's not 100% due to them not wanting to find the information. It's just the access to the information is so hard to get. You have to go to like a essay written by someone with a PhD who has all these big words you don't even understand, which is hard because put in there, education's not great. So it's a very touchy subject, and it has support, but I think it would have more if, as the essay says, if, there was more history accessible to our community as to where we came from, what we can be, the potential, to get to like basically where Wakanda is, or at least somewhere close to that, to where we could say Black people are at the forefront of this. We are up here with all these other races, as opposed to, normally we just talk about, Asian people being at the forefront of technology and all that type of stuff.
Yeah. And I think it's absolutely, you mentioned the not being relegated to a month. And I think it was especially telling that this movie did come out in February.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And, which is not to speak poorly of that. I think it is important that it came out in February, but part of me wonders if this movie could have been even more successful if it came out later in the year.
It's incredibly successful right now.
Right.
It's on track for a 220 million opening weekend. Like, it's very hard to ask for more realistically.
Well, and one of the things that I do know about underprivileged communities is when they are represented, they come out in droves.
Yeah.
Oh, hands down. Yeah.
And just hearing that, it's like, well, why wouldn't you make more movies about it when clearly the money set, if you're just talking about dollar bills in your hand, making more films like this seems like common sense.
I've been saying that for years. You know, the MPAA puts out statistics every year about ticket buying demographics. I want to say 2012, 2013, they reported racial demographics and minorities between Blacks, Latinos, and other minorities make up about 45% of ticket buyers. It's just good money to appeal to them. And that's one of the reasons franchises that are very diverse do well, like Fast and Furious, for example. But this is obviously a very different situation going on here. And films, smaller films that do have black casts and black directors also tend to do solid, respectable business, sometimes regardless of quality. So it's strange that Hollywood has been leaving money on the table for so long here.
No, definitely. Annenberg also at USC, they have a study every year. I've mostly always focused on the feminine aspect of it and like female-led movies. But they do stories. They do studies, I'm sorry, about like I'm like looking at the article right now and it was like hashtag Oscars so white or Hollywood so white. And they're talking about behind the representation behind the camera. And like, okay, the one I'm looking at right now, it's like a percentage of underrepresented characters are 26.3%. So 17 films out of 800 films as of 2016 have no Black or African American speaking characters. 40 films have no Latino speaking characters, and 49 films have no Asian speaking characters. That's not changed since 2007. So like between 2007 and 2016, like those numbers did not change. So like that's a problem, you know. Like I definitely see like where Marvel can continue after like Infinity War and leading a more diverse Marvel Cinematic Universe. The fact that there's been 18, that took the 18th movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe before we had a like someone besides a white male named Chris or or Robert Downey Jr. lead a film, like that says something. And like this is on track to beat all of those movies domestically at the box office. So I mean, this is where Marvel needs to be going.
And more importantly, it's a good movie. Like I don't know if we'd be discussing this if it weren't a good movie. I think part of it is they got the right people behind the camera. They let Ryan Coogler write a good script and execute it very well. And that to me, I still feel this is a Ryan Coogler film. I don't feel like they sanded the edges off of him the way Marvel kind of sanded the edges off of Taika Waititi.
Right.
Another person of color who recently directed a Marvel film. But it's also
I will say this film is surprisingly audacious for a Disney film.
Oh yeah, they touch on stuff that I would never expect a Disney film to talk about. They talked about colonialism, racism, African American constructs. They dealt with femininity in a very awesome way. Like this movie tackled so many issues. Loved it. So good.
And speaking of the creator's voice, I rewatched Ryan Coogler's previous film, Creed, last night. And one thing I noticed about the fights of Black Panther, it's still kind of a boxing movie. The film is structured around 3 or 4 very ritualistic and ordered fights that take place in a very confined ring. And it's kind of interesting that he is basically between a rivalry between two combatants that must face down. Now this is not new ground for blockbuster filmmaking by any shape of the imagination, but it is very different from the Marvel formula. And it seems that Coogler had where the villain just sort of appears towards the third act and they get around to him. And it's one of many areas where it feels like Coogler has brought his past experience and actually put a real thumbprint on this film.
Yeah, I thought Killmonger was a really amazing villain. To the point where with all of my favorite villains, you get to a certain point and you're like, wait, which side am I rooting for?
Right.
Mhm.
I sympathize with Killmonger a lot. And you have to say, like, at the end of the film, he does, like, T'Challa kind of goes on and continues with Killmonger's idea just in the peaceful approach. He's like, man, we could be helping with these Black communities in America. We could be helping out our continent and the people who are struggling here. And so he opens up Wakanda. He sees the mistakes that his ancestors and his father made, especially in terms of like just leaving this little boy behind to struggle instead of bringing him back home where he could prosper. And then him coming back and like, you know, trying to take, like, he's like, we're going to stop this and we're going to move forward and share our prosperity with everyone else. And
Yeah, that's, oh, sorry.
Killmonger did that. Eric Stevens like kind of changed T'Challa's mind. He wasn't really going to do anything about it. Lupita Nyong'o's character, you know, she was very like, I'm going to go save these women. That's my mission. And T'Challa's like, oh man, like I really like you. Don't do that. But you know, he actually like has this like rude awakening when Eric Stevens like shows up and he's like, wow, we've really messed up. We have done wrong in our past. We need to correct this. And that's amazing.
I do want to, sorry, I'm just like circling back to when you were talking about it was a boxing movie, like you still had boxing elements in there. I do want to throw out a little tidbit that most people probably wouldn't catch unless they knew some sort of martial arts, but there were small pieces of that movie and fight scenes that were attributed to African martial arts.
Cool.
There was,
That's awesome.
there was, like majority of it is definitely going to be, you know, a lot of it, the Black Panther as a character, he does a lot of grapples and everything. So a lot of it is judo, but certain elements of judo were derived from warriors in Africa. So, and you know, they're still fighting out in Africa. That's literally specifically done there that you can watch videos of and see parallels to Black Panther. And the fact that, you know, he primarily uses judo on top of that, which pieces of judo do come from, you know, African fight styles, especially the grappling and the pulls and all that and the throws and everything, is a very cool little Easter egg that, like I said, unless you know a lot about martial arts or African cultures, you wouldn't really catch on to. And then going back to what Haley said, I was talking with her. I like Black Panther is like hands down one of my top 5 favorite superheroes. Like, period, end of discussion. And the biggest reason I like him so much is because his character, his background, and everything is so diverse, so dynamic, and they tackled so many issues, not just in this movie, but the comic books. You know, every discussion about Black Panther and just his character, like just as a being, that it's like I literally like can't even imagine that they got it into, you know, and they didn't get all of it into one movie. Like there's just so much going on with him, and the fact that, you know, like you said, everybody can relate to Killmonger. You know, we were reading an article and it's like this movie's, you know, all about the rage that's within African and the Black communities, and Killmonger is basically the embodiment of that rage. He was in the comics, he is in this movie, but in a sense, he is also that part of T'Challa. He embodies that peace that's in every single one of us, where, you know, we walk down the street and we can be peaceful and graceful, but the moment somebody says something or does something, we basically want to rip their face off or burn something down. Like, you know, they call us the N-word. Every, you know, the history of that word comes into your mind and you basically want to destroy the other person, you know, type deal. So just the whole movie, although it is, you know, T'Challa, Killmonger, you know, battling it out, I still think in my mind, this whole movie is literally just the embodiment of the internal struggle, not just in Black Panther, but in every African person, Black, you know, Hispanic, every person of color that's out there. This movie is just the embodiment of the internal struggle that we go through on a daily basis. And I think that's why this movie does so good. And I hope that it's not just, you know, prioritizes, you know, as a Black movie, and that other, cultures go out and see it, the Hispanics, the Asians. I hope everyone goes out to see it, because I think it, like, everybody, everybody has felt that way at some point, where they, want to be graceful, but they have this inner burning rage that, at times they can't really control.
Well, that's one of the things that I think is really interesting about filmmakers now, is they're realizing that the specific is universal. I mean, one of the things that I love about Moonlight is the fact that I definitely didn't grow up with that background, but my experience is so similar to Chiron's experience in the film. And, we as human beings experience so many things that are similar, while some extremes are pushed one way or another. There is something universal about all of our struggle as human beings.
I read this really great article earlier from Al Jazeera. The writer is actually from Tanzania, and she compares like living in Africa in the movie, and kind of like dealing with the politics of it. But at the end, she talks about how like we can all identify with like the rage of the movie and the injustice, and like what we do with that. And like sometimes you feel like Killmonger on the inside, but you want to act like you have to act like T'Challa. So I like really related to that, because like, yeah, I don't see myself represented in this movie, which is fine, because I'm white, so I see myself represented in most movies anyways. But I did relate to it. So like that's really important, I think, for audiences, is that you can go into a movie. And what I really like about Black Panther is that it's kind of forcing the Marvel fanboy, like their fan base, to relate to people who don't look like them and aren't from, who don't look like them and aren't from America. So it's kind of like forces them to like see a different perspective, and hopefully they can leave this movie and go into a different movie and like, okay, I can see this from a different perspective, and we can start getting more and more movies from different perspectives.
Yeah, and most importantly, it's good. Like,
yeah, right.
Yeah, it's not just putting these viewpoints in. It's actually contextualizing them in a movie that is worth watching.
It's like with Wonder Woman being the first like female superhero movie, like it had to be good. Otherwise Hollywood would have like given up on like female-led movies. And it's just like, but time and time again, you have like a female-led action movie. It turns out audience. And like, women, we were talking about audiences earlier, women do make up like, half of the audience at the movie theater. So you have to, like, men need to be able to sit through a female-led movie, just like white people need to be able to sit through a Black-led movie. And I'm hoping in the future we get like a Ms. Marvel movie. And I'm so excited about Captain Marvel. And like, sitting, like, people who can sit there and enjoy a film that they can find, like, they can relate to, that's not about them or like about people like them. So like watching Ant-Man, you're like, oh, this is a funny white dude like me. But then you walk into Black Panther and like I related to Shuri. She's like this nerdy character and I love her to death. And like she looks nothing like me, but that's okay. And I feel like that's very important for the Marvel audience, especially because you think about like how universal their fan base is. And like going forward, Marvel really needs to diversify their movies.
Well, like, it's always been frustrating with the X-Men movies because like the X-Men is incredibly diverse. Incredibly diverse. Most of my favorite characters in the X-Men are people of color. And they have been underutilized in the film. Storm is amazing. And also, I don't know if the films are going to get into this now that Fox
Marvel owns X-Men. Yeah.
Well, that is still a year or two before that happens.
Okay.
If it gets approved.
Right,
But Storm and
we know
Black
in the
Panther.
comics, yeah, Storm and Black Panther are a thing.
Well, they were a thing. They've not been together for some time, is
Yeah.
my understanding.
I think Storm is with Wolverine right now in the comics. She was with
Ooh,
yeah.
co-workers.
Oh, you guys should see the comic strip of her, a panel of her and Thor flirting on a rooftop. It's great.
Mm-hmm. I
He's
can
like,
see
I'm
Storm
the
and Thor.
god of thunder. Yeah, he's like, I'm the god of thunder, and she's like, I control the weather. It's great.
Yeah, I don't. I feel like if they do, when they do another movie, they're not going to necessarily make that a prominent part of it, her and Black Panther, but they will touch on it because if they're going based off the comics, their relationship was at a much younger age was when they met, so they might reference that, and then she might come in and be like, oh yeah, we're old buddies, we used to kick it, blah 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 blah. But I can't. I would hope that would not be a focal point of the next movie because that's
it doesn't. It's not necessary
at all.
I think the
that would
focal point will be the consequences of opening Wakanda up.
That's going to be an
to the rest of the
Infinity
world.
War, I think, because the which stone is that? The fifth stone. The fifth stone is in the crater of the comet that fell. Like there's the vibranium.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they have like war, like you see in the Infinity War trailer of them going to battle in Wakanda with somebody. I'm pretty sure it's Thanos going after like the fifth Infinity Stone. So
and whatever anonymous robot or alien henchman they decide to have this time around.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Maybe they won't though, because with the last 3 movies we've seen, Marvel has actually had villains. Well, no, I'm not going to say that because I don't think that
the Soul Stone.
Okay, sorry. Killmonger is really a villain.
He's
by my own personal definition. I don't really see him as a villainous character. But like with Spider-Man Homecoming, you had
he's a bit of a fascist.
Culture. In Thor Ragnarok, you had Hela, and those were both really great, convincing, sympathetic villains who were well-developed characters and were still able to give real stakes to the heroes in the plot. And then with Black Panther, you have Killmonger.
With what's her name in Thor Ragnarok, I think she was a good villain in search for a good story.
I loved her story of being their sister, and originally
that part's nice, but once she takes over Asgard, she doesn't really have very much to. She doesn't do very much except to rule her kingdom of that looks like it has 5 people in it.
I mean, it's not perfect by any means.
Problem with Asgard.
It's definitely not perfect, and I agree with you that that's a problem. But that is significantly better than what we've had with Thanos in like 8 freaking movies. It's significantly better than what we've had in Avengers and in Avengers 2. And I would still say that's better than Red Skull. I mean, it's significant. It's a lot more improvement. So maybe with Infinity Wars, they can really bring it this time. Possibly, we'll see.
Well, it depends. Who wrote the script for Infinity Wars? Is it the same guy who wrote the last couple?
No.
Yeah, no. I think a lot of it is
the Russo brothers.
Yes, the Russo brothers.
The Russo brothers who wrote Captain America and Winter Soldier, right?
And they also wrote Civil War. And Civil War is like almost everybody's hands down like top 3 Marvel movies. So
not anymore. Yeah. Not Black Panther.
It is my top 5 favorite last acts. I think. I think the Captain America versus Iron Man fight at the very end is maybe the first fight scene in an MCU movie that I actually liked. That I actually felt there were any stakes to.
That scene was so good.
But it also made me realize just how deadly freaking dull most of this thing has been for me, even while I like the charisma of the characters.
Okay, but Winter Soldier exists.
Winter Soldier is 2/3 of a really good movie. For the first 2 acts, it becomes very close to having some very interesting social commentary on the war on terror. And then they throw it all out because they want to do Hydra. Fine. What?
Well, that's what I really liked about this film was it was an incredibly personal story. And that's one of the things that a lot of Marvel films have lacked in. Yeah, they have the action and they have the little character quips, but the story is oftentimes where the films kind of fall apart, especially in the villain department.
Yeah, no, and that's, you know, it used to be the watchword of the genre that you're only as good as your villain, but that went away a lot in the, I would say, during the Obama era superhero movies.
Well, here's the crazy thing about Black Panther is if you're a comic book nerd, he never, besides Claw, he never really has a consistent, like, straight on villain. Like, even in the comics, Killmonger's just like, you know, he's this hurt character who's just driven by vengeance. You know, besides
like
Claw, he never really has a villain, and majority of his, you know, comic run, he's literally, you know, he's basically his only villain, his only adversary is himself and the way society is set up. You know, he's struggling to control, you know, his rage and his animalistic side while trying to lead his country, but also bring his country into a society that he knows is flawed, his country does not agree with in any way whatsoever, but trying to better everybody all around. And then, you know, he's constantly taking on things like in the comics when he fought the Klan, which was so obviously the Ku Klux Klan. But of course, they're not going to say that. But it was obviously the Klan, you know, and he's constantly jumping from, you know, different areas. Like he ends up with Daredevil in New York. He ends up with the Avengers, Fantastic Four. Like he's just going around, and he never really, like, personally has, besides Claw, has a personal villain. He's just always fighting against something else, which is normally like injustice or violence or brutality or racism, you know. And that's like a crazy thing about Black Panther. Like, he's the only superhero out there who doesn't necessarily have a constant villain adversary.
I mean, isn't that true of a lot of the other Marvel characters where, like, I mean, Iron Man has villains, but he doesn't have like a nemesis villain.
They're not DC villains. That's the problem I have with Marvel on a whole, is that their villains are not as famous and recognizable and memorable as DC villains. Because I grew up on
Spider-Man,
DC,
who has the best villains outside of Batman.
But like Spider-Man
and Black Panther,
complete like.
No, I mean the comic.
Spider-Man saturated the 80s and the 90s as far as animated TV shows go. So of course, like his villains are very well known. But like it wasn't until recently that Marvel started doing like Marvel, oh gosh, Avery, what was it?
Earth's Mightiest
Heroes, and started doing more TV shows. But like Spider-Man has like had 4 TV shows on in the last 10 years, and they're about to do like another Netflix run. So, I mean, it's like Spider-Man. It's too much. They're doing.
And I mean, especially with Iron Man, like the Mandarin. I'm sorry that the Mandarin was absolutely horrible. Like he's one of my favorite. Honestly. One of my favorite villains as far as it goes to comic books is the Mandarin, and it made me cringe. Like I can't even lie, it made me.
You know, we're talking a lot here about representation in films. I don't think they could have ever done the Mandarin straight and gotten away with it. They would have gotten lambasted for pure racism right off the bat. What they did with the Mandarin, I'm not really crazy about Iron Man 3. It seems to be one of the more forgettable Marvel films as far as I'm concerned. But what I laughed really hard when the Ben Kingsley was revealed. I think that's maybe the smartest thing they could have done with it. They turned it, they turned a racist caricature, and they really called it what it was, a caricature, and they did it sort of meta distancing from it, and I think it kind of worked.
And they kind of did the same thing with Manape in this film with M'Baka. Is that how you say his name?
M'Baku.
M'Baku.
Sorry.
Who? Again?
M'Baku. The guy who was like, I'm a vegetarian. In the
that was
movie.
a great line too.
He was.
Yeah,
He's
no,
my
he was
second favorite character.
so funny.
Super good.
I loved him so much. But no, he in the comics, he is drawn with what a lot of people see as like this very racist like costume of a white ape costume, and he's called Man Ape. And everyone was very relieved when they started showing promotional material from the movie, and M'Baku was showed, and like this really like the way they did it was just way better. Like having like the white fur cloak thing that he wears was a lot more tastefully done than just a white ape costume.
And that scene, the fight scene that opens the movie, more or less, the challenge to T'Challa. What I think is very interesting is that, and this sort of does carry on the legacy from the Rocky franchise, is that it's not necessarily about a physical victory. It's just as much about winning respect and about the spiritual victory. You can physically lose and spiritually win. And that is a nuance that I think brings a lot. And it brings a lot, and we see it repaid near the end when we see
the death scene.
That character again, yes, and in the death scene. I think the death scene is one of the more interesting scenes in the film.
Definitely one of the best speeches that I've heard.
And it's a huge reversal for Black Panther as a character. When faced with the opportunity to kill a previous villain, his attitude was, if I give you any more breaths, that's mercy. And he's gone from a point of basically killing anyone he's against without any thought, to listening to his opponent and maybe finding a way to be human even when you're executing an enemy.
Well, didn't he do that with Claw? He didn't ask to execute Claw.
Oh, he was about to, but the only reason he didn't was he didn't feel Wakanda should be on national television murdering someone.
Oh, right, you're right, yeah.
Yeah, because Danai Gurira's character is like my king.
They're trying to keep a low profile here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for the sake of the podcast, talking about it for, I'm going to once again reiterate, I would personally, as African American, would not have been upset if Man Ape was portrayed the way he did in the comics. Because I don't believe the comics were done in a racist manner in any which way whatsoever. I think it was paying homage to the fact that African cultures out there do revere certain animals. They embody certain animals because they feel like, they are the symbol of, what they want to. So, an ape, power, respect, courage. I talked about it. Apes are one of those animals out there will literally fight any predator that comes against them to protect their own, regardless of whether or not they could actually defeat that character. They will stand up against. So the white ape, the Man Ape, his whole costume is that. It's not necessarily, now I get it. There's that history of, African Americans, blacks being called apes, being, referred to as animals, and to refer to us as lesser beings. But, there's so many African cultures out there who don't necessarily refer to any animal as a lesser being. And that's why they pay respect to them in certain sense. They respect that, people don't want to admit, people don't want to talk about it, but we are animals just like any other animal out there. We have similarities between animals that are out there. We're just more intelligent. And that's a lot of what Black Panther is. Black Panther, like that primal rage, like you just said, where he was going to kill Claw, but in a moment he had to pull back and be like, this is not the time to do this. He has so many moments of that throughout the film and comic book history. And it's just constantly like, African cultures, they agree with the fact that we can be like animals. If we lose our humanity and just become primal beings, we are basically animals. And I feel like that's what Man Ape was. He was not always, he was intelligent, definitely intelligent in the comics. But whenever he fought like an animal. He didn't think very much. He was just reaction instinct, and that's often why he lost, because he did not have, he focused too much on his instincts and his brawn as opposed to T'Challa, who is a good balance of both.
And from my understanding of a lot of African cultures, there is the concept of the spirit animal.
Yes.
That many of them embrace.
Not
not really. I mean, like in for Senegalese culture, it's not having a spirit. Well, I mean, obviously with African cultures, they're not homogenous in any way, obviously. But like for Senegal in particular, like for example, my last name is Jai, and that means lion. And we do have a connection with animals, and so I definitely understand how, like with Manape, I think I understand his costume, because if he is a villain of Black Panther who's also dressed as an animal, it's not meant to be that this Black man is an ape. And so I understand that. I definitely do enjoy, though, the reimagination of his costume, and I appreciate it more, actually, in a way, because he wasn't standing out as just Manape. He was representing this tribe, and he was representing almost like Wakanda was a mini Africa of its own, not being homogenous, but having different tribes with different cultures that would work together to have this community. But his costume was more of like his people, and it showed a different type of tribe, a different type of community, that overall Africans are Africans, but we all come from different parts, and we decide to all be African together. And we're also African together because we as a group are typically homogenized and seen lesser than or looked down upon by people surrounding us, regardless of our actual differences. And so I actually really appreciated that he was more of a leader of a group rather than Manape, because I think that would have been very distracting from that.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Thanks.
So let's talk about the women. Because I was thoroughly impressed by Lupita Nyong'o and Denai Guerrera. I'm sorry. How do you pronounce it?
Guerrera.
Okay.
That's how I've always heard it pronounced on Talking Dead Live.
Yeah, it was awesome to see Michonne.
Like
because,
kick butt.
Well,
some more.
When doesn't she?
Right. When does she not kick butt?
Yeah.
But also, great. I mean, I thought that Shuri was also amazing, and Ramonda was also amazing.
They were also
and then
good.
The whole sort of like even more awesome than the Valkyries or the Amazons, I thought, like group of like all female bodyguards was just
It kind of reminds me of how sorry.
It's good.
Oh, I was just gonna say that one of my biggest disappointments of the Wonder Woman film was the fact that I thought the Amazons were heavily underutilized, because they were only in the first 30 minutes of the film. And then this film comes along and is like, yeah, we're going to have these women be an active.
Well, and also the Themyscira Society was really poorly underdeveloped and underutilized as opposed to Wakanda and Black Panther. But what I really loved about the women in Black Panther was specifically the women and like the huge amount of range of what women can do socially. Like it was very really Fury Road in how it was showing like women all over the spectrum of like what is like women who can kick ass by being really intelligent and working hard in the lab and becoming really like into technology and medicine and development. Cool. That's one way to be an awesome badass as a woman. You could be a spy, and physically kick butt. That's another badass way to be an
And she
awesome
was
woman.
also she was like also like an activist and a humanitarian. She wasn't just like being a spy for Wakanda. She was also helping out women in need. So
yeah,
like
exactly. And then bringing that all around too with the ending.
Yeah,
really
that was great.
that
And then Denai having like this very strong moment in the film as a Okoye, where she tells Lupita's character. Oh, hold on, let me look at IMDb. Nakia. They're having this. Yeah, Nakia. They're having this conversation, and she says, "You know, I am loyal to the throne. I am loyal to my king. I can't come with you." But then at the end, when she sees like, oh, you know, T'Challa's still alive, and she's like, okay, the challenge is still on. You're not my king. I'm going to fight for what's right. Peace. And that was also great. Like you can be loyal to your station, but you can also be loyal to your people, like to your best friend, or the person you choose to serve and to follow, I should say. And she, I love that she has T'Challa's back, because it seems like he's always getting into something.
Yeah, and that moment that you just brought up too with Okoye and Nakia really also highlighted one of the best elements I thought of Black Panther, where in every situation where there were two sides to an issue, both sides were totally right. It wasn't just good versus bad. And that was one where I thought it was the strongest, where it was like, yeah, they are both doing the right thing. The best way that they can in their minds and with their capabilities.
And even better, there was also, whenever there was that conflict, there was also an understanding that you could definitely see where each character understood where the other one was coming from.
Absolutely. Like
those that not surprised when Maccabi like kind of stabbed him. He was like, okay, no, you're right. I didn't bring you Claw like I told you I was going to. So, I
and
see
also,
you.
Like, he had like iterated earlier that he more or less has the same ideology as Killmonger did. And so like that pairing off was less of a betrayal more than, yeah, this sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a lot more genuine than what you normally see in these movies. It's like, well, you've just been offered power and you're an idiot, and like, yay, okay, I'll betray the guy. Which, well, we saw in Thor Ragnarok.
Right.
I like how much of the conflict in this, and we were talking about villains. I think one of the things that makes a good comic book villain is their ideology in opposition to the hero. A lot of the Batman villains are very psychologically similar to Batman, just like they're extreme in one aspect.
Right.
And same with Spider-Man's villains.
Yeah.
Yeah. Killmonger was very similar to Magneto in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah.
A lot more zealous than Magneto.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that.
And a lot more likable and understandable. I thought Killmonger was a lot more relatable than Magneto.
Yeah. If Magneto had the same resources as Killmonger did when like being shown with the might of Wakanda, I mean, like he probably would have got a lot done. Because he almost did in X-Men Last Stand.
I'm not even. Yeah.
Again, but let's not talk about Last Stand. That doesn't exist. I'm sorry.
No, I'm also still trying to decide if it's the same Magneto in the different trilogies now.
I give up on following X-Men. It makes no sense continuity-wise.
I'm mostly thinking of Michael Fassbender's Magneto.
Yeah, no, he was great.
It was a good Magneto. They wrote First Class is honestly maybe my favorite X-Men movie.
Oh yeah,
it certainly is mine.
Yeah,
I mean, lack of Wolverine. I was so happy.
We got 2 really good Wolverine movies. Thank goodness.
Yeah. And then no more. We're done. We're done with Wolverine.
Yeah.
Now we can move on to X-23 and other actual X-Men.
Yeah.
Plural.
I think Dark Phoenix is next.
Well, no, speaking of characters of color, like I freaking love why did I totally forget his name for like a second?
You love
I freaking love Bishop. from the X-Men. So like you introduce Cable, I want to see Bishop.
Oh.
Ooh. Oh. Oh. Yeah. Mm. Mm. I forgot about Bishop. Man. Oh.
Why do I not
Alien? Yeah, he's great in Alien.
Yeah, he's oh man. I feel bad that I forgot about. Well, I was about to say, wait, who's Bishop? Hold up. Okay.
I'm like, why do I not know who Bishop is?
Oh, he's like only one of the coolest X-Men characters.
Oh, he was in Days of Future Past.
Yeah, he was, but like I would like to see him prominently featured in a movie.
Have lines.
Wait, he was in Days of Future Past?
Yeah,
sort of.
He was with Professor X and Magneto at an abandoned Chinese monastery in the final stand against the Centennials.
You're right.
I know who he is. Okay, I know who he is. I remember that scene. Okay, I'm caught up. Continue.
I was saying, like, there are so many great characters of color, and it's wonderful that we have Black Panther now, but like there's a lot to pull from.
Oh yeah.
You know, we and hopefully they see this and they're like, oh, what other characters of color do we have that we could make main characters? And
hey, can I ask the people who read more comics than I do? Are there any really good Latino characters out there we haven't seen? Because like
Miles Morales is great.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
I mean, he's half black,
Miss
half
America.
Latino,
which is cool. I'm down. But like
Miss America, is awesome. No, not Miss America. That's not her name. Oh my god, it's something America. She's supposed to be Captain America's daughter or something.
Captain America has a Latino daughter.
Well, like she takes over for him, like Ms. Marvel does. And I am not caught up whatsoever on the comics.
No, you're saying Miss America. That's correct.
No, it isn't Miss. Okay.
Yeah.
Marvel. Her name is America Chavez. That's what I was forgetting.
I know. I'm trying to think of. Well, I mean, it's not the Marvel, but there's the freaking spellcaster from. He does spells. I can't remember his name.
I'm looking it up. There's not a lot of big ones.
Marvel. No, it's not Marvel. It's DC. It's
Oh wow!
He's basically he's the DC version of Doctor Strange, and I can't remember what the frick his name is. I'm struggling right now.
Oh, okay. There was also a Latino Green Lantern at some point, but they'll never get to him.
Are you?
No, but you're totally right.
No, I'm not thinking Black Adam. It's why I want to say Santana or something.
No, Santana's is his daughter. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, you know who I'm talking about. But I can't for the life of me remember what his name is. It's making me mad. I'm gonna have to look this up real quick.
Pato Santana.
Well, now we have X-23.
Yeah, X-23 is a Latino, which is not canon to the comics, but
it is now.
His name is
Santana.
Santana.
I mean, canon to the comics is always such a silly phrase. I mean, canon to which comics?
Yeah, that's true.
Well,
they keep rewriting them.
Right.
But also, for better or worse, pretty much every
Batman.
time a change happens in the movies, the change gets adapted
in the comics. In the comics right now, Captain America is Hydra. So I don't think they're going to do that in the movies.
Anyway, what else do we like about Black Panther?
It's technically all the technical elements of the movie are freaking nominal. Like everything from the cinematography to the score to the sound mixing and editing to everything in the art design, obviously with hair and makeup and costuming and production design and the CGI rendering and the color. Like everything technically was so superior to most of these franchise movies that are coming out right now.
Let's talk about the cinematography for a second, because Rachel Morrison was nominated for Mudbound this year.
Which honestly, the cinematography in that was just okay. But if she gets an Oscar nomination for Black Panther, I'm going to be rooting for her to win.
I don't know if the cinematography was that good. I think a lot of what was pretty about the film was production design.
Yeah,
cinematography-wise, it's well lit. I think at times it's a little bit sterile, which is pretty common.
I don't
with
agree.
the Marvel
I thought so many of the shots and the movements and the frames were really good, especially when Killmonger walks into the throne room and it starts upside down and it like
that was a good shot. That was a nice J.J. Abrams shot.
It was, but it also had. It was so like.
Well, it's a visual cut. The world's literally upside down.
I mean, I know that like mechanically it's not super difficult to do, but that was just such a strong choice. I like it.
Yeah. It's a good
But I thought
choice.
The way that she shot all the action scenes too were just so incredibly well done.
I think there's a few action scenes I really like. There's one that was definitely an homage to Coogler's own one-shot fight in Creed. And I do think it's a little better than the standard Marvel will shake the camera and figure out later stuff, but I think it also had still some elements of that. The big car chase in Korea, I had no idea where anyone was. Now these, again, that's a nitpick. I think it's a very good movie.
Well, I also think that in terms of some of the confusion of where people were, I really think a lot of that wasn't cinematography. I think that came down to rendering, like shifting a lot of stuff in the backgrounds versus how things were shot on a green screen.
So I really want to get into the production design because there is so much beautiful, gorgeous work that Hannah Beachler did.
Really, everyone did.
Well,
like,
yeah.
Like also art, all of it was great.
So Hannah Beachler has been working with Ryan Coogler since the very beginning, but she also worked on Beyonce's Lemonade and Moonlight. So like, and the work in this there was so much research put into the costume designs.
Yeah, by Ruth Carter.
And also I love the fact that for hair, all of the designs and methods were all centered around keeping hair natural. And even like, I know this is kind of a minor thing, but as often as they could possibly help it, they tried to let all the actors' hair dry, like air dry instead of using diffusers. And I really appreciate like small touches like that really make things work better in the film later.
Wouldn't that take a long time to do?
That's why I said like as much as it was humanly possible for them to do with their schedule, you know.
Right.
One thing that was really cool that I talked about with Loren was the conscious decision for the chain for the villain. Oh, hold on. Actually, I have to take this call. Yes.
I'll go get it.
Go answer. Anyway, sorry. That the chain for the villain was gold. I forgot his name again. Can you please remind me? Killmonger, yes.
Sorry, 1 second.
So, Killmonger was the fact that he had the. Sorry, we're ordering food, so I was like distracted. So the fact that he chose the gold chain and T'Challa chose the silver, like non-flashy one, was very interesting because there's a lot of criticisms with the Black community, specifically the hip hop community, rappers wearing gold chains. And it's like, you know, supporting capitalism and all of that. I remember there was this Black artist who had this very interesting art piece that I never forgot, where it was a picture of a Black man's hands and he had one of like chains around them and he was painting them gold. And it was very interesting. And it was, I was just thinking about that piece when I saw a Killmonger choose that, coming from his background compared to everyone in Wakanda and what he's seen, what he's gone through, and what's instilled in his mind.
Whereas no one in Wakanda has like really experienced that suffering.
Yeah. They don't have the need flashy jewelry. Right. They don't have the need they would think that's gawky and ridiculous and unnecessary.
Everything that T'Challa chose to wear in the film was very subtle and subdued and regal in the same light, and I really appreciated that. I do have this I shared it on the group chat. But I do have this Twitter thread pulled up, and it was someone who went through and picked out all of the references that Ruth Carter made and the costume choices. There is Mercy and Sturma lip plates used for Lupita Nyong'o's tribe. And then the Zulu headdress that Queen Ramonda wears. Ramonda, thank you. I was like, oh, wait. Ramonda wears is like a distinct headdress. So it's worn for married women for celebrational.
It's up on the chat right now.
Oh, you got it up?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, and it just keeps going through, and like it went even farther than I realized. I haven't even read all of these, but it's so interesting that they did that much work, and that they did that much research for it, and I really appreciated it.
I honestly think that this is going to get a costume design nomination next year.
I don't think it will, but I really hope it will. If it really deserves to.
Honestly, why don't you think it will get it?
I think that the whole stigma of the comic book movie is going to be held against it in terms of how much it really deserves in technical achievements. Because yes, we do have some Oscar nominations for Logan, but in really small chunks.
Stop. Suicide Squad won for hair and makeup.
That's true. That is true.
This has all of the possibilities of winning for costume.
That's true, actually. If it's not only going to be nominated, but also win for that stupid Sharpie smile that the Joker had, then yeah, I take it back.
But at the same time, for costume design, it usually goes with people with eyes, and
no, it usually goes to historical dramas and not originality.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, this is kind of blending the old and new.
Yeah, it is, but I think a lot of people are some historical drama will come around between now and the Oscars, and it's going to be all about that.
Well,
or another Disney movie.
But at the same time, you know they'll get called out for racism if that happens.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They won't allow that.
That happens all the time anyway.
They're going to have to give this a nomination to avoid Oscar So White again. Like, honestly, that's why Get Out probably got a nomination. It's not going to win, but that's why I got a nomination, is because they knew there would be backlash.
I think it got 4 nominations.
I'm pretty sure Get Out is going to win original screenplay.
Oh yeah, definitely. But it's not even close to
guys, it's February. We should not predict the Oscar winners in February. We have no idea what's really going to come out between now and then. It's a very good screenplay, and it'd be cool if it got a nomination. But we don't know what's going to come out between now and then.
Early. We were just talking about the costumes and Get Out. Like, that was...
Yeah. Oh, we're talking about Get Out. I thought we were talking about Panther.
No. Although, yes, the script is super excellent.
We were talking about the costumes being nominated for next year.
Oh, no, it won the nomination because it was good.
Yeah, I know.
It earned those nominations. I mean, maybe not Best Actor. Best Actor is the only of the Get Out nominations where I raised an eyebrow at, but there are people who have made the argument towards me, so I figure if more than 3 people make the argument, maybe there's another side to it. I'll give it leeway.
Wait, are you talking about an argument, like you're saying that you think that the nomination for Get Out script is like kind of the weakest?
I mean Best Actor. No, Best Actor was the one I was iffy on.
Yeah. Oh.
He's too much of a straight man.
He's fine in it. He's fine. He does a good performance. It's just not a best of the year performance.
Of course, I feel that
you could say that about half the things that get nominated for half the white people get nominated for Oscars too. So like, you know.
Yeah, but let's face it, last year was really a weak year for male actors.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know. Daniel Day-Lewis was pretty damn good.
Yeah. Daniel Day-Lewis was really good. But that's right. One guy from all of last year. Like, and then you had Woody Harrelson and Sam Rockwell, but after that they were all just kind of serviceable.
Yeah. But getting back into Black Panther,
what's that?
Getting back into Black Panther, I think that there is so much going for this film. And, you know, I love the fact that we finally have a film like this, because I can't think of a film like this that exists other than the film that I've been drawing parallels to, which is Coming to America.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, wait, why? Wait, why? I want to understand why you're like, besides, like, I don't know.
The obvious.
Besides the fact that he comes from a fictional African country and has a necklace. You know, it's mostly just the fictional African country.
Well, I mean, yeah, but like, I think that Black Panther is different of itself because it's like the first film. It doesn't really matter if the country was fictional or not. It's more of like portraying Africans in a positive light and portraying them more than poor people who live in mud huts with flies on their faces for Westerners. I think that this film is very different because, I mean, I grew up with Coming to America, and so did my family, because that was one of the, like, on the base level, one of the few things that Western media had to offer that portrayed people like us. But, you know, as it's a comedy, and it's a good comedy, I love it, but it didn't like establish any, I don't feel like it established any commentary really between, like, the Black American characters were, they weren't really shown with fault besides being, I don't know how to explain it, being ignorant. They were more ignorant of the Africans, but there was never really any dialogue that was constructed around that. The Africans were known as they were rich and royal, and they had submissive women there. All the women in Africa, except for the queen, were submissive and boring. And what's more desirable is having an American Black girl because, you know, they can think for themselves and stuff. Like, I don't really.
But the king in that movie literally doesn't want that. Like, he abandons his riches and lives the life of a low person working at McDowell's.
Right.
On with the Big Mac.
I'm saying that, like, it was not portraying Africans like, it was more of like Africans were, it's preferable to be Black American. Like, it felt like that more. Like, because when you saw Africans, they were very eccentric, you know, throwing rose petals everywhere. It was more of a face of comedy. Most of their actions were supposed to be hilarious. The women were literally so submissive that they like cleaned him, and like, you know, like at the beginning was like they cleaned his balls, and like the woman who was supposed to marry him would hop on one foot and do all of that, and he said he didn't want that. He wanted a American woman. Like, it's more preferable, you know, to be Black American than African. And I'm not saying that was a theme of Coming to America. This is, again, coming from a huge fan of the film, someone who loves it, but that was more of the perspective of that. I don't think the Africans were portrayed as positive of a light.
Yeah, and we've certainly come a long way since that film. And one of the big reasons why I bring it up is the fact that, you know, it is a well-known film among even some of the most, you know, uncultured people as a predominantly Black movie that a lot of people know about. And
you know, I just think of Coming to America when I see like when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, because like I saw so many people like on Facebook and stuff show up to the Black Panther premiere in Coming to America like costume, and like so like I can see that parallel being drawn just because so many other people were like, oh yeah, let's just go like dress up like this, because it was like one of the other like very like celebrated predominantly Black films that have come out that, you know, is universally loved in America.
And one of the things
Lupita Nyong'o had a Coming to America party with several of the cast members of Black Panther.
Yeah, but the other thing about Black Panther is it's not just about being a big movie with a primarily Black cast. It's also about a really huge movie that's about Black excellence.
Right. And I love the celebration that was put into the premiere. I saw people at my screening dressed up in dashikis and African print, like a lot of beautiful prints. I was just seeing so many colorful outfits, and so many people who were ready to celebrate this movie. And like I saw this story about people going to a movie theater and signing people up to vote at the movie theater, and other people dancing and having music, and there was food. And like I think that's so important for people to be able to like come out and like celebrate this huge, like, because this is definitely a game changer for Hollywood. They can this is proof that movies can have a diverse cast and sell tickets.
And well, I mean, we've had a few before. Why don't we spend a minute and talk, because we do have a lot of comic book movie nerds here. Why don't we go around and talk a little bit about the history of Black-led superhero films and how this compares, and more importantly, maybe how it differs?
From my understanding, the first one was Blank Man, or
You mean Meteor Man?
Meteor Man. Yeah,
I think I've only ever seen Blade and Spawn.
that was the first. Go ahead.
Those are two good. No, I was gonna say Blade and Spawn are two very good ones to talk about. And
Yeah,
if those are the only two you've seen, so those are
very good. I really wish I had seen Meteor Man. It's not a very well loved film, but its director Robert Townsend is I've seen some of his other stuff. He is a very socially conscious and very interesting writer who had a few years where he was in the late 80s and early 90s, where he was part of the wave of Black filmmakers coming to Hollywood, but who, like many of his contemporaries, didn't quite make it for one reason or another. Spawn, I think chronologically, is probably the next thing. We're definitely going to not really talk about Steel because, it's Steel. Spawn has always been interesting to me. It didn't really get a lot of lasting respect, and it definitely has some dated CGI, but it is better than a lot of the other 90s superhero movies attempts. It takes its themes very seriously. Minus the CGI cape, that suit still looks amazing, and it's also weird in ways that superheroes stopped being when the MCU was birthed.
And let's not forget the HBO animated series of Spawn, because that was actually good.
That was a very good series. That was very boundary pushing in the 90s.
Hear about that.
My thing about Spawn in comparison to Black Panther would be Spawn never really touched on the fact that Spawn was black. It was just this dude went to hell and came back and now fights all these weird creatures. There was never really any parallel at all to African American culture or him really being black. There was really nothing there. It was just he's a black dude that went to hell and came back.
And it should be noted that Spawn, like Black Panther, has a white creator, and I think the film itself that continues.
But he also hasn't.
The film itself.
But Stan Lee and Jack Kirby pretty much have not written Black Panther since the first year of Black Panther.
No, I'm talking about the movie right now.
Oh yeah, but the comic came about because they were both just kind of like, I think it's time that we have an African American, or like we have a black superhero. So they were just like,
And he originally appeared in a Fantastic Four comic, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was his first. His first breakout was a pseudo villain in a Fantastic Four.
And then he had his own run. Yeah.
Let's see. I want to make a slight correction to what I said earlier. The Spawn live action film was not a white creator. It was a Japanese American filmmaker who went on to basically direct Garfield things for TV. Poor guy.
Oh.
Yeah, that's it right there. Volume 1. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he that was his breakout, and then after that, his actual comic line was called Jungle Action.
Oh.
Yeah. So that was it was Yeah, that was his original base comic line. That was him, was called Black Panther. Jungle action featuring Black Panther.
Bad.
Yeah.
And what else was there? Well, I mean, maybe the most important are the Blade trilogy, which more or less started the entire superhero craze, and they often
Wesley Snipes was originally, he wanted to be Black Panther, even right before they started Blade. I definitely would not. I don't think he would have done it any justice. I think he could have played Black Panther, but I don't think. Especially at that time, I don't think Black Panther would have done as well as it did now.
Well, yeah, and I doubt there would be any people that were actually African in the film at that time. Yeah, and they'd probably try some weird attempt to like make Black Panther the only like major black character in the movie, which I saw some white people posting online about the Black Panther movie, and it's like, I don't know what the big deal is about Black Panther. I mean, did they forget that Blade came out? And it was like,
well, we can't have any more after that. Come on.
Yeah.
How dare we have two?
Yeah, but
sorry, go ahead.
But Blade was a token black guy in a predominantly white movie.
What?
And that's actually one of the, when you go back to if you go back and look at any of the interviews when Wesley Snipes was talking about him wanting to do, a lot of the problem with anyone wanting to do Black Panther then was a lot of the movie buffs out there and the comic book buffs agreed that because there was no way to have a predominantly black cast for a Black Panther movie, the only way to put one out that early would be to have put out a Black Panther movie about him being with the Avengers, and the Avengers weren't even set up yet. So there's no way you could have done a Black Panther movie, because the only time he's in his instance where he's quote unquote he's the token black guy is when he's either with the Fantastic Four, hanging out with Daredevil, or with the Avengers.
And even with Civil War, he had a trial run before he got his own movie.
Yeah,
that was the backdoor pilot. They were kind of working on it. I think at that point, Ava DuVernay was in talks to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, people liked him in that movie. And that's when the fire really got started. Another side thing to talk about briefly is that while they definitely don't count as black casts or people of color casts, the horrible Fantastic Four movies that Fox made in the 2000s were black directed by Tim Story. Obviously, it's and it's interesting that is the version that went with the all-white cast, and the white directed reboot is the one that attempted a little more diversity. Some of that is just maybe science at the time. Some of it's maybe, I don't know, imagination.
I think
the
it's
Tim
also
Story movies lack a lot of that.
I agree. It's probably more the sign of the times, though.
Yeah.
So the whole past couple years, we've all become more woke, basically. And I don't think we're allowing Hollywood to continue with same old. I mean, like, it all started with, hashtag Oscars so white, continued on with the Me Too movement. And it's kind of like we're flushing out the old Hollywood and we're starting over. At least I hope so. I hope this is a sign of what's to come in Hollywood. We get more diverse films. We get more films about minorities and women, and more films made by women and minorities.
And we've been seeing more prominent ones recently.
Definitely.
I think when I see this, I'm very encouraged, but I also think back to the 90s where we did have a small wave of very prominent African-American directors who made it big, made a few really good movies, and then some of them burned out, some of them were forced out, but by 2002-ish, a lot of those very promising voices had diminished, receded from the forefront. And I think it's great what's happening now, but we have to make sure it continues. Part of it will also just be the quality of the films, but I think a big step is getting creators of color behind the camera, because those are the people that are going to be more invested in getting it right.
Well, and I like the fact that they didn't take the risk with the director that had only made one film.
Yeah.
Because, like, you know...
Look at you, Colin Trevorrow.
Yeah.
Well, with the MCU, when they've handed their movies, because it's been such a huge problem with big franchises handing off their films to people who've only done one film. Out of all the franchises that are doing it poorly, MCU is the only one who I think is really being intelligent about it. But one of the things that I like is that they're not bringing on these newbie directors in order to give them a pay cut and essentially have them be, you know, oh, well, since you don't have, you know, a reputation behind you, you're not going to get paid as much, and you're not going to have as much of a, you know, creative input into the movie as, say, the producers will. With Thor Ragnarok and with Black Panther, it's incredibly obvious that they let the directors have a lot of room to really work out what they want to do creatively.
I think Coogler got more room than Waititi. I definitely sense Waititi-isms in Thor Ragnarok, but I also see so much of the formula in Ragnarok.
I completely agree, but at least with Black Panther, they did give him more room, but also his two films were Fruitvale Station and Creed, so he's had enough time to prove himself. And I do think that a big part of the reason why he was brought on board was because he was going to bring Michael B. Jordan with him,
which
was a really smart decision for them to make, obviously. And he was completely the right choice for that role.
Oh yeah,
but I do appreciate that they were more intelligent about bringing in a fairly newish director, but especially him in particular.
I feel like
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's okay. I just wanted to put in, I feel like I've enjoyed Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther being the two movies that have had like the most voice from the director so far in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think that says a lot about how Marvel's formula needs to change. And I think that's why Black Panther was so popular, like not so popular, but so successful story-wise, was because it was so far removed from the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
And I was thinking that too. Yeah, I was really happy that it was a good standalone.
It needed to be a standalone.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, you know, more or less my feeling at this point is I wish they were all kind of standalone.
Me too.
I think the promise of the MCU lost a lot of its shine when I saw Iron Man 2 and thought, this is half of a really good Iron Man film and half of a really annoying trailer for a future movie. And I've seen that pattern repeated again to larger and smaller extents, but it almost feels like I'm having a carrot dangled in front of me rather than given an actual movie.
Well, I mean, look at how much they've teased Thanos to the point where, like, I don't care. Like, you know, until I actually see Thanos do something in the movies. Yes, I know he's awesome in the comics, but until I see him do something in the movie, I don't care.
Yeah, I mean,
that being said, I can't wait for more Black Panther movies. Like, I want all the Black Panther movies after this.
I honestly think that the next Avengers movie is going to be a step down from this movie.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, it's going to be. You can't juggle that many storylines.
I've also, you know, I've liked the Russo brothers, you know, as directors. I followed them on Community and the rest of development, all that. They're fine. And honestly, they did bring a little more to Winter Soldier than I expected. So but after that, I don't know how much they have to say as creators. And I think one of the differences between Waititi on Ragnarok and Coogler on this is he had a lot more he wanted to say. And he also had a entry point, a character that facilitates what he wanted to say. By the way, I did want to like go around the room just very briefly. Like, what's everyone's sort of history with Ryan Coogler, and what are their thoughts on him in general?
I've seen Fruitvale Station, and I'm a huge fan of that movie. I was not very aware of the story behind that movie until I watched it, and I like broke down in tears at the end of it. It really messed with me. I didn't understand what was happening for most of the movie until the confrontation at the train station happened. But I feel like people need to see that movie. They really do.
Creed was a beautiful movie, and that I don't even know what else to say besides it was just a beautiful movie. That's my only experience, and it was glorious. And I watched it in the theater twice, and I definitely don't go to movie theaters very often to see movies more than once. That one, I saw it the opening day, and then I think a day or two after.
I saw Fruitvale Station in the theater. I was blown away. It's essentially the first Black Lives Matter film that I've seen.
Before it was a movement, really.
Right. I was a fan of Michael B. Jordan from the film Chronicle. And I kind of wanted to see what he would do in a film by himself. And I was pleasantly surprised and heartbroken by the context of the film. I found Fruitvale Station an incredibly humanizing film. I like the fact that they don't try to glorify the main character as being innocent. He does have flaws, and they're present. And I feel that in doing that, it makes you more sympathetic to him and his struggle and the unfortunate tragedy of that situation.
Am I the only one here who doesn't like Fruitvale Station?
I think so.
I haven't seen it, so I can't.
I became emotionally attached to that movie.
I see. The thing is, like, to me, while Michael B. Jordan gives a fantastic performance, I think ultimately that film is a little too hagiographic to really work. It is not, to me, it's not specific enough, and it lays on the tragedy and foreshadowing with really, really thick for me. So I think there are really good elements of it. To me, I didn't really start appreciating Coogler until I saw Creed, and which the second of his films I've seen in the theater. I'm not a huge Rocky fan. I like the first one. Don't give two anythings about any of the in-between ones. But I was completely floored by the skill and nuance and depth and specificity, both in the screenplay of Creed, which Coogler co-wrote. He also co-wrote Black Panther, but also in the direction. There's lots of really nice, tiny little gestures that maybe wouldn't have been there in another film of this type, but really help make the characters come alive and work together. I think Ryan Coogler was born to direct mid-brow Hollywood blockbusters that have a little more going on to them. And I think what he's done with Black Panther really elevates all the things that he learned in Creed. I think he's really come into his own as a director, and I just think that's really exciting.
I mean, I have a question for you, Loren. Do you give Fruitvale Station a little bit of leeway for its filmmaking problems, considering it's his first feature film? Because it sounds like he's clearly learned from that as he's been going, right?
I think that's the exciting thing about following directors through their careers. You get to see them get their sea legs and find out the things they're good at and the things they're maybe less good at. And so like me not liking Fruitvale Station or not thinking it's the best movie of all time, it's not a knock against Coogler or the work of the people involved. It's a mark on the journey that he goes on that I think has been really cool to see.
Awesome.
You know, some Kurosawa's first films suck too. So Kubrick's. But then again,
what? You can't say that.
Killer's Kiss is bad. Killer's Kiss is the movie I watch when I make a bad movie to think, well, we all started somewhere. But at the same time, you know, Orson Welles did pretty good with Citizen Kane as a feature debut, and we're all gushing about Jordan Peele's feature debut, Get Out. Still,
I mean,
it's
struggle
his feature
to say,
debut, but
yeah.
like, how many short films did he make for Key and
Peele? And how, like, yeah, exactly. He already worked in the industry for 5 years.
I'm just saying, like, you know,
it's a feature debut. It's a feature debut. Hey, Orson Welles was the biggest radio star on earth before he made Citizen Kane. So, but you know, he was in the industry, but Kane was the first feature.
Yeah, but with Jordan Peele, like, he was an actor, but he was also a writer-producer before that. Or writer-producer-director, I think, for years before Get Out.
Yeah, but it's a feature debut. There's a big difference between directing a short film and a feature film.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And directing a skit and directing a feature film of a completely different genre than anything you've ever done, which is one of the things that's so cool about Get Out.
I honestly don't feel that Get Out is too far away from Key and Peele.
Yeah.
You know, people come from their different perspectives. That's a valid read. I know the theater I was in laughed their asses off, as did I. Now, getting back to to Coogler, I am excited to see Black Panther again, but in his body of work, I maybe had a more instant recognition of the tightness of the script and general story and direction in Creed than I did of Black Panther. I'm excited to see what I notice on a second viewing and whether or not that'll shift. Mm-hmm. I think by and large we've talked a lot about the Marvel formula, but there's larger formula things that Black Panther breaks with and subverts as well. One of the things that have scourged blockbuster films since The Dark Knight did it was the villain gets captured on purpose trope. And this is a film that does upend that a little bit. It subverts that. We sort of gets set up, but they switch it around and go another direction. And there's a lot of nice playing with the tropes like that. One thing I don't know if it was talked about when I was getting food was the use of Martin Freeman as the token white guy and how that plays with the history of token black characters in many other films.
Well, and then the double entendre of what it means to be a token white guy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, with him in Andy Serkis.
No, I know you do.
I get you. Are you saying that?
Oh, I got it. Okay, sorry, that was delayed. I was.
but there's the nice idea that Cindy was actually talking about this earlier. That normally the white character is the white savior. But here, he literally has to fight to even say anything, and that's kind of fun.
I love that.
I absolutely agree with it. Actually, what I thought was one of the best, really small moments in the film with his character was when, I can't believe I'm spacing on her name, and I even said it earlier, but when T'Challa's sister sort of like half-jokingly calls him a colonizer.
Sure.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was fun, and it was really awesome. I mean, she was saying it as a joke, but it's also kind of deserved. And it
was meant to sting.
Yeah, exactly. It was meant to sting, and I appreciated the fact that he just took it. He didn't try to be like, oh, not me, but that's not me and what I'm doing, and how dare you? I'm not racist. It was just a small thing of she said it offhand as a stinger. He just took it, and that was that.
I do kind of wish this is obviously the spoilers, right?
Yeah.
Talked about spoilers.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right. Obviously the spoilers. tiny nitpick. They had a wonderful moment to potentially kill the Martin Freeman character off, and I think they missed the boat on it. But maybe part of that's because I just really don't like Martin Freeman in these movies. His American accent is slightly better than Benedict Cumberbatch.
Benedict is so bad. It's so bad. I don't understand why it's so
I'm
bad.
an American.
It's so bad. I don't understand why.
Look,
I don't get it. I genuinely, it just makes me feel crazy. I'm in the CIA in America. I have a hat.
That being said, I thought Andy Serkis's South African accent was pretty good.
It was actually better than some of Forrest Whitaker's accent was all over the place.
His reminded me, it's like he took Last King of Scotland and he was like, I'll just do that again.
But nicer this time.
I'll do it again. I remember. Vaguely.
Also, like, Andy Serkis was so much fun in this.
He was.
Yeah, he was really
I'm
just
sad
so
that they
much
killed
fun.
him off. They killed off the wrong white guy.
No, I'm glad they killed him off because you got to kill him off eventually anyway, and it was a good death scene.
It was.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
One of the big problems of
the so much.
But one of the ongoing issues with not only do the Marvel movies never really seem to have very good villains, but they never really seem to kill anyone off.
Well, they killed off Ronan way too soon. He comes back so often in the comics for Guardians of the Galaxy, and I was just like, why did you kill him off? He's like their main villain / friend that they work with.
If he had lived 1 second longer, I would have died of boredom.
Oh,
I think he's one of the. I have no familiarity with him in the comics, but I thought he was definitely one of the worst villains they've had in the movies.
Okay. I love Ronan.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
All right, let's move on
to
Black Panther.
Yes, Black Panther.
I really love the score.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think the consensus that I've heard from everybody is best Marvel score, period.
Right. It was really refreshing to hear the tribal African sound incorporated into the score.
Yes.
And it also wasn't just a
total mixed with everything, and
I really appreciated.
Lamar was definitely less involved in the score and music than I would have thought,
which I appreciated. Like, I love the fact that Kendrick Lamar made 4 songs from the movie, but I did also appreciate the fact that they were mixed in really well, where they were used in good scenes and to good effect, but they weren't overshadowing what was actually happening in the movie.
Yeah, because I find that to be a problem a lot of times when you get, musical artists to do music for the movie, then it becomes more about that than like what's actually going on in the film.
Yeah, it was really, really well balanced.
Yeah.
But it was lit every time I heard Kendrick.
Oh, absolutely. And also, I'm really hoping somehow that All the Stars will be nominated for Best Original Song next year. I know it's too early to talk about next year's Oscars, but I'm still hoping down in my heart.
It's a bop. Like, it's way better than every single song in La La Land, like, hands down.
Yeah, obviously.
I want it.
That's almost mean. Hey,
I'm still bitter that Moana lost. I'm still bitter.
Emmanuel was so close to his EGOT.
I know.
Why would you take that away from him?
But
also the 16-year-old girl who got hit in the back of the head and
with the
her note lost her Oscar to people who couldn't even perform their songs live.
And had to have John Legend do it. Yeah. God, we're burning La La Land on this one. Let's save that for another podcast.
But it is really mean to even compare All the Stars to anything from La La Land.
Yeah, it is. It is mean. But All the Stars is, I mean, it's just perfect. And I want it played everywhere.
I can't believe I don't hear this all the time everywhere I go yet.
Right? But like I'm
don't
telling you,
everywhere.
as soon as credits rolled, every single person in that theater was jamming. Like I was dancing in my seat. I was so excited. And it was a beautiful moment.
Absolutely. And speaking of, the beginning and ending were both really, really well done. The sort of
Lion King,
in
like
the
Mufasa
sand,
talking.
the in the sand origin montage at the beginning of the film was super, super good, and then the montage during the end credits was really good.
Yes, it was. Sorry, I thought we were
Like
talking about how like his father was talking to him, and I was just like, oh, it's such a Mufasa.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Well, and then you have the king fall from grace and have to like fight his way back to reclaim the throne. I'm
honestly surprised that when he got thrown over the cliff, Eric Stevens didn't, like Killmonger didn't say "Long live the king." I was like, I was waiting for it.
But
I was like, let's bring this Lion King like reference full circle here.
Yeah, but I have a joke about a trend of really great short films in the middle of really, really awful films. But this was a film that was like a really great film that also had two really good short films in the middle, or not in the middle, but at the beginning and the end.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see that.
One of the things I thought was interesting was that the music ended up being part of the thematic divide that the film was going for. I had listened to the Kendrick songs early because I love Kendrick.
Absolutely.
And I was almost scared that there's no way that the film could figure out how to use these well. It ended up being that the Kendrick songs ended up being half of the score, where the original score, I'm blanking on the composer, doing all the hero scenes, all the Wakandan music. And the Kendrick songs almost ended up being the music of the villains. I think the first Kendrick song is introduced by the Andy Serkis character, where he insists on having it on, but it also ties into the African artist versus American artist divide that the film does thematically. And
I get what you're saying.
Clever.
I think I only ever heard "Pray for Me" when Killmonger was on, and I feel "Pray for Me" was like one of the only songs I heard a couple of times,
and it's really good.
It is really good. Talk about another. Like, I would be happy if that got nominated too. Like The Weeknd and Kendrick up on. Oh,
yes.
Okay. We're just getting too excited about the Oscars next year. It's gonna be a party.
It's only February.
I know, we haven't even done this year's Oscars.
Well, you're totally right. The Weeknd and Kendrick at the Oscars doing a live performance is a little too much for me to handle a year ahead of time.
I can't do it. I would die waiting.
Yeah, exactly. That's too much.
Why'd they come out with this in February again? My heart can't take it. My emotions. Yeah.
Also, it's great that this movie came out on President's Day.
Yeah, it's great that this movie actually gets a 4-day weekend.
Yeah.
To really stretch out and enjoy that money, because I plan on seeing it again this week.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh yeah, we're seeing it tomorrow because we have Movie Pass and we haven't used it yet.
Oh yeah, use it. I am using it on Thursday.
But also, it's really nice that a movie like this came out on a President's Day during this term. I'll put it.
No, yes.
It's really nice that we can not focus on that stuff and instead go to a theater and support Black Panther.
Well, yeah, and I was actually kind of worried that the movie was going to have I'm gonna say it, a Trump-like character, and I'm glad I could watch a movie and not think about Trump.
This movie, it felt like escapism, but also talking about today's politics a little bit.
Right.
And like, or at least our racial politics. But it was like somewhere where we could have this dialogue and this dialogue separate from our current president, which is great because this president has put all forms of progress on hold. So it was nice to have this separate conversation, and I really appreciated a moment to do that.
Well, I also like the fact that it wasn't about this specific president, because if you make it about one specific figure instead of like more historically ongoing issues, then the movie will eventually lose its relevance.
Right.
Where I don't think Black Panther will. But
I also feel like
that would have been a weaker decision.
I feel like they did it on President's Day weekend just for the exact purposes you said. He's put so much progress on hold. I think this was kind of a silent protest to say you can do as much as you think you can in the office, but we're still going to progress in areas where you can't control us, such as film. I think the fact that they brought it out was like they deliberately did that on purpose. Like they literally did that on purpose to be like and also to show everybody who's disheartened by this president to be like, he's not going to let us do anything, to be like that he can stop us. He can only stop a movement so much, and you can only stop a movement to the point where you allow yourself to be stopped.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of see.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry, I was just gonna say I kind of think that this movement is actually gonna. This movie is going to start a movement in and of itself. Of bringing that culture in and kind of embracing Afrofuturism into fashion and into. People are going to see Black Panther and then they're going to do their research and find out about this. And
if they do
I feel that. What's that?
If they do the research,
I turned around right after Black Panther and wanted to know more about Afrofuturism. That's something I had never even considered before.
Well, I think if you're someone that gets woken up and wants to learn more by Black Panther, that's fantastic. But that's you and us. I don't know if everyone's going to do that. I hope they do. True. But as the old saying goes, we got to educate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It can't just be one movie because that's unfair and limited. It does have to be a movement.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a movement of Afrofuturism. It's just that unfortunately it hasn't been really highlighted in like a mainstream spotlight like Black Panther. So I think the success of this is going to lead to a lot of Afrofuturism media, like short films, foreign films, comics, that sort of thing.
Has been doing it.
Exactly. I think it's going to really open the floodgates for a lot of these content creators who are already out there to become a lot more influential and well-known, because people will be, it's slightly unfortunate that it'll have this connotation, but I don't think really. They'll be like, oh, hey, have you seen this short film? It's kind of like Black Panther.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to go see it. And then more people will see that content and then be inspired and create more content like it. And I think it will kind of grow from there.
Is anyone else excited for that movie that's coming out this year? That's already been picked up as a movie, and I think the book either just came out or it came out late last year. And it's by a black, an African American woman, and it's a young adult novel, and it's like it's being compared as far as like it's not the subject matter, but the scope of it to like the Hunger Games, and I can't for the life of me remember who the author is or what it's called.
Oh,
is that the one about that's kind of like Mad Max, where like
yes, I think so.
Where like the vehicles are like eating buildings or whatever?
No, not that.
No, not that one.
Okay.
It's a different one.
American Street.
I kind of had heard about what you're talking about, but I also cannot remember the name.
This was like a huge
to the almighty Google.
Flame in the Mist. Bayonets who've been hired to kill her. Peasant boy, she said. Okay, I don't think that's it.
I know that HBO is working on a post-apocalyptic African fantasy series called Who Fears Death.
Oh.
And George R.R. Martin is the executive producer on it.
That actually sounds pretty interesting.
Is that going to be like, you were talking about this earlier, like wouldn't it be cool if there was an African Game of Thrones? Is it going to sort of be along that line?
Well, this was the first thing that I heard of.
Sorry, I found it.
Oh, what is it?
Darkest Minds. In the future, it's a futuristic young adult novel. The government tries to intern and suppress young people with special abilities, including 16-year-old Ruby. Amanda Stenberg will play Ruby, and Mandy Moore will play a doctor. Comes out September this year.
I mean,
Gwendolyn Christie's
I'm looking at the cast though.
Mm-hmm. And it's just Amanda Stenberg in it.
Oh.
Is that it?
For Darkest Minds. I'm looking at the cast and it's mostly
white people.
White. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Never mind.
There's also A Wrinkle in Time next month.
Oh yeah, that's exciting. I'm excited.
I was excited, but I was so excited about it, and then every trailer I have seen has like squished my hopes deeper and deeper in a dark hole. I mean,
I'm really excited for Ava DuVernay, but like I really don't like the makeup and hairstyling.
The production design is a hot mess, and I really have a problem with the ensemble cast.
It is a very unusual production design. I know what you're saying there, Kira. I do think it's a thing I could warm up to when I watch the film, which is clearly trying to be very. It is referencing some contemporary paintings, but also 1930s Wizard of Oz stuff. It's coming from a very unusual place aesthetically, which could either work out really well or really bad.
I was trying to root for it, but once I saw more and more of, the clips and the trailers of the performances, and once I started realizing the full ensemble cast, my hopes just started falling apart.
I will say that it is an absolutely amazing book, and I'm just hoping that they stay true to it, or if they decide to veer off, that it is good. I love Selma, but I'm very
it's a huge genre
skeptical
shift
about this,
and it is.
Yeah,
it's always worrying when you always take a second look when the director shifts genres so radically, which is also part of the problem with how we treat auteurs, in that we kind of expect to be pigeonholed and only make one type of movie.
Well, I'm not expecting Ava DuVernay to only make that kind of. I mean, when I heard Ava DuVernay making A Wrinkle in Time, I was like, "Fuck yeah, let's do that! That sounds awesome! Let's do it." It's just the more I've actually seen it looks like things are more and more out of her control because it's a bigger film.
I mean, I really have no knowledge about what's going on behind the scenes of that film. I know she took a long time picking what her next film after Selma would be. And I think part of that was waiting till she knew she could get creative control. She was in talks to do Black Panther. She was in talks to do a Star Wars movie, but she wanted to wait until there was a project that she felt could be her baby. Whether that changed in the time since, I don't know. But we are talking about how great it is that Disney, of all people, is starting to give creators of color a voice, and how they are attempting to do more social commentary. And
if there's any company that's going to do it, it's going to be Disney.
It has to be Disney. They own everything.
Warner Brothers back in the day. They used to be the ones.
Well, back in the day,
is a hot mess right now.
No, but he's right.
2007, not that long ago.
Yeah. Exactly. Lauren's absolutely right.
And it's honestly surprising that it's Disney, because I know I've bragged a little bit on way too much, and this will be the last on the MCU, but I always felt that the MCU is kind of where the creator-led superhero movies of the 90s and 2000s died. And there are some good things about that. We haven't got another Catwoman, but there's some bad things about that. We haven't got another Hellboy. or Nolan Batman.
I personally thought Logan was up there.
Yeah,
Logan was so good.
That is one of the more surprising superhero films that come out in the last few years.
Yeah,
and
but if
yeah,
you're talking about there's no more Nolan Batman, Logan was really in that same vein.
Wolverine and Logan is, I think, the closest we've gotten, and that is very encouraging. But I think for a long time, this Marvel line was to stamp out creativity and imagination. And I think it's finally changing now. And it's interesting that Disney, of all people, is the ones spearheading it.
And I will say one thing that's really
a good place to wrap up.
One thing that I am happy to see in the Wrinkle in Time trailers is the explanation of wormholes is not the piece of paper through, or the pencil through a piece of paper explanation again. Like, it was actually kind of a creative way to explain it. I know that sounds minor, but like, I'm really sick of seeing that. Like, at least they took one of those cliches and didn't do it.
Yeah.
And it is just, it is just a handful of trailers. I'm still crossing my fingers and hoping that they're really terrible trailers to a good movie.
But, again, we're getting to see more Black creators attempt things and maybe find ways to say something within the new old Hollywood limits.
Mm-hmm. Did anyone watch Ava DuVernay's documentary, though?
I did. Yeah.
Okay. I felt like we were all forgetting that. We were all like just focusing on Selma, and I was like,
that is a good point. But going from a documentary to a non-documentary is already a huge shift for a director.
But she jumped from Selma to 13th and then to A Wrinkle in Time. So I feel like she's kind of like if she can pull off A Wrinkle in Time, she's gonna be like a jack of all trades, and they're gonna just like throw money at her to make every movie.
And I'm absolutely rooting for that.
And if she fails, she will never get another blockbuster.
She won't get another blockbuster, but that may not be a bad thing. While it has certainly worked out for Coogler and a few other people, I think the blockbuster game has ruined a lot of independent directors.
Yeah, I don't agree with you.
I don't agree with any of that at all. We've had really amazing blockbuster films.
We've had really amazing blockbuster films.
But we've also had huge, massive releases of like a plethora of independent films.
The thing is, though, is that
a huge
audience
expansion in the accessibility to independent films lately.
You don't see studios spending a lot of money making an original property. It's usually connected to something else.
Or a
sequel. And I would like to see a studio take the risk and put their money into a big budget film that isn't connected to a previous property that includes even a book series.
Yeah. Well, Hollywood is always buying books. Okay, most of their original movies are just books we don't remember because we don't see them in the bookstore very much anymore. Vertigo.
I would say some of the most successful blockbuster movies that weren't based on a previous property. Like look at Star Wars. I mean, yeah, you're borrowing from Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. There's
10,000 billion other things.
Right, yeah. But like. That's an example of
yes, absolutely
what you could do. And after watching Black Panther, I would like to see an Afrofuturist film that isn't in the Black Panther universe and, using the same sort of aesthetic to tell a different story.
Yeah. I would live for that.
I think we're all down for that. I don't know how realistic that is, and even with the great success of Black Panther, just because we don't see original movies tend to be capped at around the $60 million mark.
Right.
And more.
I think you could make an original film.
Even Shape of Water.
With that budget.
But even Shape of Water was a $19.5 million budget, which is ridiculous considering that it's Guillermo del Toro who has done, probably the last really original, quote unquote, original blockbuster movie was his movie Pacific Rim.
Well, you made a movie where a woman fucks a fish. That's a hard sell for studios.
But it's still the dude who did Pan's Labyrinth. It's still the guy who did Pacific Rim. It's still the guy who did Hellboy, Hellboy and Hellboy 2.
Yeah.
What is with this less than $20 million budget?
Well, because he hasn't had a financial hit in many years. Just because we love him and he continues to make great movies doesn't mean his movies do well with the general public.
I just said Pacific Rim.
Pacific Rim was one of those that disappointed. It was saved by China, but it never hit number one in America. And it gained appreciation since then, but it was beaten out by Grown Ups 2 of all things.
But it's also got, like you said, it's gained appreciation since then and did at least well enough to warrant a sequel.
I saw it on the last day it was in theaters, and it's in my top 5 movies of all time. So,
and here's the thing you got to go to with the general public when it comes to movies and whatnot. They're not paying attention to who's directing it. So there's not a whole lot of loyalty when it comes to, oh, this director did Pacific Rim, Pan's Labyrinth, and Hellboy. I'm going to go watch this movie. They're looking at, does this movie look like it's good to watch? And like you pointed out, a movie about somebody fucking fish, there's the general public's just they're looking for their next cheap thrill. They're not really worried about loyalties or who directed it and all that type of stuff.
And actually looking at the box office right now for all of the movies that were nominated for an Oscar, audience attendance is way lower than last year, even though we've had an even better run of movies this year than last year.
Well, yeah, because the economy is in the toilet and people can't afford to pay $12 a ticket to see every independent Oscar-nominated film. I mean,
I do want to say, I have it on screen share right now. Black Panther has made $192 million in the United States. And if you include the foreign market, has made over $100 million over its budget. Already, its budget was $20 million. I know it doesn't say it on here.
And the figures don't even include Sunday.
Sorry, its budget was $200 million. And
that we know of. We never really know how much these things cost. When the numbers get that high, especially, they tend to.
Well, yeah, of course,
especially
but
on marketing.
This is even before accounting for the Sunday of the opening weekend.
Yeah, but opening weekend, $361 million. That's
awesome.
Tremendous.
It's awesome. I mean, Marvel movies always do well. This has gone far and beyond expectations. I think part of it is because it's a new audience. Part of it's because it's really good, and the word of mouth is big on that.
Well, it's really good, and one thing I don't think I've mentioned is the fact that there were actors and people of the Black community that put in money so that kids from underserved communities could see this movie.
Yeah,
it's true.
And
it goes back to
Octavia Spencer did it. She got an entire community tickets.
You were gonna say, Avery?
It goes back to what we said in the beginning, when communities like this are represented for the first time on a big screen, they show out. I mean, it happened with Coco as well for
not as much as I wanted it to, but
yeah, not as much, as we would all like.
About Coco, though, a big part of that was actually because of that stupid Olaf's Frozen Adventure being attached to it during its opening weekend and the first few weeks. A lot of people literally were not going to Coco because they weren't going to sit through that short. And once that short was removed, it did do better, and has Coco is still in theaters, and it came out in September.
No, it's not still in theaters.
Oh, well, now that Black Panther is here, but as of last week, it was still in theaters from September to February.
Yeah. I would like to point out, though, in that Rolling Stone article I shared, Chadwick Boseman, they talked about how 2 years ago he was in Gods of Egypt. And I mean, I haven't even watched it. I refused to watch it after I noticed how white the cast was. But Chadwick said the only reason why he took that movie was because he was the only, he was going to be the only African, someone of African descent as a god. And he's like, this movie needs at least one of them because they're talking about ancient African deities. And And so he quoted and he was saying, but yeah, people don't make $140 million movies, $140 million movies starring Black and brown people. And like they just did, and it just blew expectations like out of the water. And like with what you just said, with 300.
And that was
what
only
was it?
2 years ago.
Yeah, that was 2 years ago. And look at him now.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
I personally would like to see a biblical movie that looks period and regionally accurate.
Right.
I will say this though. Chadwick Boseman, easily the best part of Gods of Egypt.
I believe it.
He's funny in it. It's actually worth looking up the super clips to it. The movie itself, if it weren't for the so white cast, it might be a weird little gem. It is one of the most bizarre and imaginative blockbusters we've gotten in a while. It is bad. It has a lot of issues, but it's got some interesting things about it. All right, just said my piece. That's it. I'm not really going to die on the hill, though.
Okay.
I'm not dying on the hill of Gods of Egypt. I just once liked an Alex Proyas movie, and part of me just hopes one day he makes another really good movie.
All right, so just out of curiosity, what's everybody's take on this movie? Like, what would you rank it?
Black Panther?
Yeah.
I gave it 4 stars on Letterboxd. I guess that's about an A-. That's about as high as I ever rate a movie on a first viewing, unless it's, destroys me. I definitely think it's in the upper tier of the Marvel movies. I think it's better written, it's better directed, it's better scored. There's a lot more thought that has gone into this film than a lot of the previous films. We were talking just now about how Octavia Spencer and other people put out money to make sure kids can see this movie. I think it's a very conscious and intelligent point, meaningful point, that the film both begins and ends on children, particularly the types of children who could benefit from this kind of escapist fantasy in their lives.
Exactly. Yeah. The children who, whose minds are limited, and, people tell them they can't do things, or circumstances tell them they can't do things. That probably is my favorite part of this movie, is exactly what you said. The fact that it starts with those kids and ends with those kids, and ends with the same kind of kids seeing the possibilities of what they can do and what they can become. And that's how the movie ends. That's probably my greatest takeaway from this movie, like hands down.
I will say, I think this movie is the only film that is sort of in that talk of being a good representation for kids to look up to, that actually deserves it. I feel like that concept gets thrown around for really shitty movies that don't deserve it, and it becomes sort of a scapegoat of, oh, well, no, the movie's made for the kids and at least they have the representation, and I hate it. But with Black Panther, absolutely, this is the only one that I think really, really does deserve that sort of conversation around it.
What I loved about it, and I rank it like really high up there for me, not only like as Marvel films, but films in general. I'm gonna give it an A for going off like a grading scale here. Is that the representation is so important, and it's like I mentioned earlier in the conversation how important it was in the Marvels, like the MCU, to have this big of a film and have it centralized, and have it separate from the MCU at the same time. It needed to be its own story. We needed to see the story be told about this community and this culture, and have us all relate to it in some aspect. All human stories are relatable, but like we have had 17 films of white dudes being relatable. Like it's time for everybody else to have some, silver screen time, and tell their stories, and see how we can relate to that. So yeah, that was really important. Like I was so impressed with this film. I'm so glad it did well and is continuing to do well. Like hats off to Coogler and like the whole cast and crew.
I absolutely agree. I think in the post Dark Knight comic book movie franchise era that we're in now, it's clearly at least in the top 3, if not the number 1.
Agreed.
I think that it far surpasses anything else in the MCU, in the DCEU. I think it's much better than the new Star Wars franchise movies by a lot.
Go on. What's that still?
Okay, I'm talking about Force Awakens, Rogue One, and Last Jedi. Yeah, Black Panther is easily better than all 3 of those movies.
Yes.
I agree.
I don't think this movie surpasses Winter Soldier for me in the MCU, but definitely in my top 2, top 3.
I mean, for me, I think like since The Dark Knight sort of really made this a big movement in mainstream media, my top 3 would be Black Panther, Logan, and Deadpool. Personally.
Cool. What about you, Ren?
So I have always been a fan of the African aesthetic, and being somebody who grew up in a predominantly Black community, I've always wanted to see things that reflected the society that surrounded me. It's kind of weird as a Latino white person trying to exist in those circumstances, because you always are the colonizer, you're always the outsider in that situation. But it was really refreshing to finally see what I've been wanting to see for ages. And it's great that we have movies about civil rights. It's important that we do have movies that talk about slavery, but it's nice to see one that alludes to that, but isn't solely about that.
Yeah, I think that's the big power of it, that it alludes to those things, but it's not centered around it. It's a very good point.
I found the film incredibly powerful, personal. I think it was a great collaboration of artists all working together. It's wonderful to see that not only is the cast diverse, but the crew as well. There are a lot of Black voices on both ends, and like I said at the beginning, we don't often see this in non-comedic films. I would give this movie an A. It's definitely the best MCU movie that I've seen. I personally like Logan and The Dark Knight a little bit more, but it would be my 3rd favorite.
I actually think Black Panther is a tighter, more developed film than The Dark Knight, personally.
I would agree to a certain extent, just because I think The Dark Knight kind of falls apart in its 3rd act.
And it's so much about like having to sit down and give long expositions on like your college thesis of morality for your philosophy in the modern era class. Sort of like, it doesn't feel enough like it's supposed to be a movie with real people having real conversations. I feel like Black Panther was just a much more developed, well executed film.
And I also like the inner conflict of T'Challa.
Absolutely.
The idea of trying to be a powerful Black leader, but also realizing that other members of other Black communities are suffering, and that conflict that he has with Killmonger was incredibly powerful to me, because
I agree.
You see that he has a point. He's certainly too zealous about it, which makes him a villain, but
only a little bit.
He was talking about genocide.
No, I know, but I feel like his zealotry really wasn't as extreme as it could have been. Like, if it was badly written.
Now, I do think it's interesting the fact that the film is called Black Panther, and these ideologies are actually very similar to some of the ideologies that get thrown around about the Black Panther Party, but also some of the ideologies that the Black Panther Party embraced. This idea of isolation is actually a part of the Black Panther community, because when they had nobody to go to, they created a community for themselves. And that being said, they have also had the reputation of being, to some people, this is not what I'm saying, but to some people, being the black version of the KKK. Which I could see.
That's fair.
And I could see that conflict being represented in the two characters conflicting against each other.
Well, the whole idea of Wakanda as well also attributes to the the history of the Black Wall Street. That area that kind of quote unquote little civilization, little small area that was just the predominantly wealthy, African Americans that turned out not doing well. Yes, because it was burned to the ground, but just the whole isolationist idea, although profited that society for a period of time, in the end turned out to be part of its downfall. So that also, there's a lot of historical elements that were part of this movie that, force not only non-people of color, but people of color to go back and look, at your history and, where we came from, and how, repeating the same mistakes over and over aren't going to get you anywhere. Like T'Challa realized, like constantly being isolated and not being a part of the rest of the world, especially the other people of color out there, although it benefits us, it in the end, it's detrimental to us.
Yeah, I thought it was very Fury Road. Like in Fury Road, they have this whole idea of, well, we're just gonna leave this oppressive system and go somewhere better. But then the big climax is them realizing that they can't just leave and let suffering continue unchecked, and they have to turn around and just destroy the oppressive system. And with this movie, it was kind of a similar notion of the fact that they were doing really, really well, but they were worried about not like sharing what was working for their system, but more of what they had being abused by other shitty societies, and learning that they're going to have to figure out a way to work with everyone else cautiously but openly.
I just want to say that there is an excellent documentary about an isolationist community that's sort of like the Black Waco, that I would highly recommend people watch. It's called Let the Fire Burn. It is a very hard watch to watch. I mean, it's a very hard watch, but it's a very powerful movie that kind of illustrates some of the struggles that African-American communities have had trying to create a culture of positivity. So, Avery, what did you think?
I said it before, but it's definitely the movie. Like I said, the main part of the movie that hit home for me is, my view on the world and how we change has always been with the children, and I'm literally sitting in, the west side of Chicago, one of the places that's known as, the hood, the low income area. And I've been in this area pretty much my entire life. So to have something like this come out in my lifetime, having seen what I've seen growing up and, directly been a part of you're black, so you either play basketball or you become a rapper. There's no other way for you to get out of the hood aspect. This movie, just that scene, what it can do is enough to make this movie literally just because of that one of my top 5 movies of all time, period. End of discussion. Marvel Cinematic Music, it's my number 1. Mainly because besides Green Lantern, Black Panther is also my favorite superhero. So I'm a little biased, but like it's number 1 hands down. I'm a little curious to see, having been a comic book nerd, I'm curious to see where they're going to go now, having, one of the main villains, Claw, be dead. And then on top of that, they don't do a whole lot of resurrections in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So Killmonger does get resurrected in the comics, but who knows if I don't think they're going to resurrect him down the line. So I'm a little worried to see what they're going to do with the character, but because there is so much that can be done with him, I'm also hopeful for it. And I really hope they continue to knock it out of the water. I want to see, some more focused movies. I want to see some Latino focused movies. I really love the equality aspect of this movie. Perfect example when they're doing the King's battle or King's fight, at the Warrior Falls. Everyone's allowed to challenge the king, even the women. They asked everybody if there's anybody who challenged and there was women there that could have stepped up to challenge for the throne. It was not just isolated to men. Of course, we already talked about the women are freaking badass. So there's so much in this movie that they did so great that opens the doors for so much to go down the line that I'm hopeful. It's a great movie. I'm glad for what it did. And there's so much potential, not just with Black Panther, but what we can do now that a movie like this has shown that it can be successful, that I'm all for it. And I said to Haley bought me the tickets. We went together to go see the movie. I said, until Infinity War comes out, this is my movie of the year, and I'm pretty sure this is going to trump Infinity War 2. I don't want to hear about nothing else. That's just, personally. I'll be optimistic. Maybe something else might come out, but as far as I'm concerned, movie of the year happened in February, and there's not really much else to watch.
So, real quick, just because of movie of the year. Last year, I thought I had my movie of the year picked out and everything, and then The Greatest Showman hit me right on Christmas Day. I was like, oh my god, this is it. This is the best movie of the year. Leave me alone, everybody. Like 6 days before the end of the year. This is it. Continue.
And like I said, I'll be I'll keep my options open. I'll still go see other things, but anything that wants to beat Black Panther has a very hard sell.
Oh yeah, no, I agree.
All right. Does anybody have any final thoughts?
Everybody listening to the podcast, go see Black Panther.
Yep.
Again.
Yeah. Go see it again, and maybe they'll make more movies like this.
Let's make this a higher multiplier than all the other Marvel movies. I feel like I know so much about like film ticketing and like how they base like how successful a movie is based on like multipliers and stuff because I read that Forbes article. So I'm just like, yeah, let's give it the biggest multiplier out of all the Marvel films.
And what I will say is if you have Movie Pass, at
Use
least
it.
pay for the movie once. So watch it twice, but at least pay for it once.
I did. I paid for it twice.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. And if you have any comments, put them below. Thanks for listening.